I woke up today and it was raining. So I thought, let's talk about mud. So I got in my car and drove to the river and talked about mud. Let's go! Welcome to Hogan Teaching. I'm your host, Mr. Hogan, and today we're going to talk about mud. We're sitting right next to the Arkansas River, which is a very muddy river, as you can tell by its beautiful brown color. In this river, as with any river, as the water rushes along, it picks up particles from the ground, or riverbed. The amount and size of the particles in the river is proportional to the speed of the river and material present. A slow-moving stream won't pick up as many particles as a big river on a rainy day. Another important aspect to keep in mind is the type of particle that is being picked up. If your riverbed is covered with limestone, like you'll see down south in the Arbuckle Mountains of Oklahoma, the particles of calcium carbonate won't erode as fast as the deposited sediments, or dirt. In Kansas, we have a lot of dirt. So, as the river carves its way through the grounds, it picks up tons of dirt, literally. As the suspended particles of dirt and rock travel, they eventually end up in the Mississippi River. You're welcome, Mississippi, which then travels to the Gulf of Mexico. You're welcome, Mexico. The little bits of dirt, limestone, and eroded granite then mix with the seafloor bed and eventually turn into rocks like shale, coquina, siltstone, and sandstone after thousands and thousands of years. Wow, who would have guessed mud could be so cool? So let's look at some mud. This is not coffee. Have you ever noticed how mud is much darker than dirt? Have you ever wondered why that is? Here's a neat little experiment you can do at home. First, you get 7 clear glasses filled with about a quarter cup of dirt lined up in a nice row. Next, you add a little bit of water to each cup, 1 teaspoon each. That's the tiny one. As you move down your nice little row, increase the amount of water 1 teaspoon at a time. So your second cup will have 2 teaspoons of water, your third cup will have 3 teaspoons of water, and so on. Go ahead and do it. I'll wait. Alright, so here we have some mud. As you can see, the mud changes from a lighter color over here to a darker color as it gets more wet. Okay, now that you did the experiment, what did you notice? Did the dirt get darker with the more water you added? If you want, you can add more water to your last cup until you get a thin line of water on top of the mud. That means the mud is completely saturated, much like the mud that I just showed you. I found that in a pond behind my house. So, what does it all mean? As you add more water to the dirt, the tiny spaces of air in between the particles is getting filled with water. That is why it's so important that when you're watering your potted plant to get the right balance of water, not too much, not too little, because the plant's roots need oxygen. The more water you mix with the dirt, the less oxygen there is. There are only a small number of water plants that have adapted to a supersaturated soil compared to the vast number of prairie grasses and plants that you'll see here in Kansas, like these right behind me. That's because Kansas only gets a moderate amount of moisture, so the plants that evolved in this area are perfectly suited to their environment. But I digress. Let's talk more about mud. So, remember when I said that the particles from the river turn into rock? Well, they do, and you don't even have to take my word for it. If you ever go to explore a creek bed that's carved, around 20 meters below the surface, pretty deep little creek bed, you'll see that the further you go below the surface, the darker the color gets and the more rocks you begin to see. In our area, we have something called the Wellington Formation, and around 15 meters below the surface, you begin to see beds called shale and gypsum beds that are the result of mud turning into rocks. Wow. If you explore even more around the area, you can find vast deposits of limestone with marine fossils. That's shells like this that I found in the Gulf of Mexico. There's a nice road cut just west of Augusta on US 54 if you're ever in the area and want to get a glimpse of what lies below the surface. I know what you're thinking. Mr. Hogan, limestone is the result of calcium carbonate-rich seashells. There's no ocean around, so you must be crazy. Well, I might be a little crazy, but you hit the nail on the head talking about seashells. Rocks are important because they can tell a story of Earth's geologic history. Limestone deposits are here because there was an ocean here. That isn't any longer. The ocean is known as the Late Cretaceous Interior Sea, which existed around 145 million years ago. There's a cool museum in Hays, Kansas that talks all about it. You should go check it out. I hear there's a famous fossil there called a fish within a fish. Who knows what that's all about? So, after all this, you must be wondering, how on earth does mud actually become a rock? Well, the answer may or may not surprise you. So, do you remember those particles in the river? Well, a lot of those particles are actually very fine rock particles, like sand. I don't know if you can see that. Very fine rock particles that usually come from granite, which is the primary rock that makes up the surface of the Earth's continental crust. So, as the water and wind erode away at the surface of the Earth, the tiny particles of dirt become rich in tiny quartz crystals. When water mixes with these particles, the spaces in between become increasingly compact due to the removal of oxygen. Think of mud hardening on the bottom of your shoes. With enough time, these quartz crystals will begin to reform and interlock like a vast network of chain link armor, turning the brittle mud into a hard rock. If you add pressure and or heat to the mixture, the crystal matrix becomes increasingly organized, which in turn strengthens the rock material. Consider the formation of glass, which is mostly made out of quartz. As you heat it and cool it, you can make a pan strong enough to bake your favorite casserole. Thanks, Mom! The most common rocks you'll see around here formed this way is shale and mudstone. Shale is a rock made with very fine particles of quartz and other minerals that are cemented in a matrix of very fine clay particles. Ceramics are made in very much the same way. We just speed up the process using incredibly hot kilns. Clay is made mostly of hydrous earth minerals like aluminum silicates, which is a fancy way of saying mud. That, when dried, form a tough paste that we call the cement of the rock. Another term for the larger particles in this cement would be aggregate. If humans mix a cement material like hydrous calcium oxide, a product made from limestone, with an aggregate like sand, then we get concrete. Concrete is everywhere, and we only discovered the process because some people way back looked at some rocks and thought, hey, I can do that. So kids, if you don't mind getting a little dirty, you too could study the Earth and see what our beautiful planet has to offer. I hope you enjoyed our segment on mud. Join us next week when we talk about why we're crashing a multi-billion-dollar spacecraft into Saturn. Experience, explore, educate. This is Mr. Hogan signing off.